What's good in the whole YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here bringing another video. Today I'm bringing a video on Lupinranger versus Patoranger episode 23. This episode is called Status Gold, and it's pretty important, that aspect of the episode, the Status Gold part. This episode is pretty cool because it introduces a new set of villains. It's a trio of villains that are called the Lymon Group. Lymon, and they're made up of Lyman, who is the leader of the trio, Giwi, and Ushibarak. If you're wondering what those are based on, I don't know exactly what Lyman's based on. I know that Ushibarak is based on a bull or a Taurus, in other words, and I know that Giwi is based on like a kiwi bird from like Australia. So it's an interesting set of ganglers. As far as things go, they actually start the episode off by being inside the villain base, and Lyman's sitting in DeGranio's seat, and what happens is that they actually end up being there before DeGranio and the others show up from wherever they were. And so what's happening is that Lyman plans to take over the position as the head of the ganglers because he wants to take that control, but he has to prove it, of course, like everyone else. So what does end up happening is that following this, we end up seeing that that Noel is at the cafe. He's eating a meal that's made by Toma, and he loves the food. He thinks it's wonderful, and he thinks that Toma doesn't really trust him, that maybe he can convince him to trust him. And so he tries to create a situation that will help, which is that there's a lot of kidnappings that are occurring, having to do with a cooking class, and they attempted to deal with the gangler that was causing it, supposedly. But when Tsukasa, Sequoia, and Kichiro tried to like pretend to be cooks and everything, they made amateur meals and it wasn't successful, so they never were captured. So they thought that maybe Toma, being an actual cook that knows how to cook really good meals, maybe they could take advantage of it. So what happens is that Toma agrees to work with Noel, even though he doesn't really trust him. At the same time, Toma's condition is that any Lupin collection item that they gain from dealing with the situation, he'll get, not Noel, because he doesn't trust Noel at this moment. So what does end up happening is that following this, Noel decides to go teach a cooking class. No, not Noel. Toma's going to teach a cooking class, and Noel's going to be the assistant, and he makes these great meals, and the gangler enjoys them a lot. So then from here, what does end up happening is that because the meal is so good, they're very happy about things that are occurring, and suddenly the gangler shows up. He ends up capturing Noel and Toma, who are brought onto a ship where their goal is to cook at a cooking competition, where if they win, they'll be made to the winning chef that actually manages to defeat the gangler will be able to become the personal chef of the Lyman gang. And so the thing is that at first what happens is that Toma tries to make an escape with Noel from the ship and maybe deal with the gangler and get his Lupin collection item, and they do transform into Lupin X and Lupin Blue. And when they go to fight him, they're doing okay. They end up being Lyman and Giwi. They try to fight them. At one point, he turns around Ushibarak, which is the gangler that actually captured them. And what happens is that Noel notices that the safe that's on his back is a status gold safe. So you may be noticing the status aspect of the name, and he even mentioned it in a prior episode about the different statuses for the safes that they have. So status gold is different from like the normal one, which is I believe silver. The difference being is that the silver ones, they can open no problem at all. When Toma tries to open the safe on Ushibarak, it says error and prevents him from opening up that safe. So what also ends up happening is that his versus vehicle breaks, where the the dial is. So that's a very important thing. The dial for the dial fighter breaks, and so he, first of all, is not able to transform, and second of all, he's not able to open saves. So not a good thing. What does end up happening is that leads to Toma having to hide and try to hide the fact that he is who he is, so that they could do the competition still and not be attacked instantly. In other words, they have no idea that they are the same people that they just captured. So it's a very important detail. So then following this, what does end up happening is that Noel decides to do a quick retreat with Toma, going back to where they were being kept. What happens is that Noel offers to repair Toma's his versus vehicle, and the thing is that there's an important factor that occurs when Toma's cooking at the cooking class, is that Noel refers to him as being like a professional cook and a professional chef, and the thing is that Toma really appreciates that and feels really good about himself because of the fact that that's, he's being told that information. How would you feel if you think of yourself one way and then you're told that you're even better? You're gonna feel good. So it really encourages him a lot, and he realizes, Noel brings up the point that, I may be going back and forth between being a thief and being a officer of the law, but at the same time, my main goal is to protect and maintain the Lupin collection items. So I want to work with you and fix this versus vehicle. So what he does is that Noel begins to work on fixing Toma's versus vehicle. In the meantime, Toma begins to go to where the cooking competition is, where he can cook whatever he wants in the time that he has, and so he cooks up a meal, and at the same time the Gangler also cooks up a meal. The Gangler's ability allows him to actually act like a microwave, which is pretty interesting, so he actually manages to cook up like a steak dish that turns out really good, and the Ganglers like it. But then when Toma gives them his dishes, what happens is that they go through the roof, and they're like, oh my god, it's amazing, and they devour the whole thing, and they love it so much, in fact, that he wins. So Giwi and Lyman are the ones that devour the food. Then, following this, Ushibarak is pretty upset because he only learned to cook for the sake of cooking for Lyman, and so he feels like if anyone's able to be better at cooking than him, then they deserve to die, and so he begins to get angry and attack them, but they end up retreating out to the outer decks of the ship that they're on, and suddenly Noel shows up with the Lupin collection item, the versus vehicle of Toma, and it attacks Ushibarak, and then eventually Toma grabs the versus vehicle, goes up to where Noel is, and they begin to transform. Suddenly Noel also sends a message to Kairi and Umika, and then they head off to go and help. So then at that point they all transform together and they begin to fight. What we do end up seeing is that Umika and Kairi end up having to fight elsewhere initially. Like they end up having to fight Giwi and Lyman, and initially they don't do so well, and at one point it looks as if they might lose, but suddenly when there's like a big blast of an explosion that occurs from Lyman, Kairi actually uses the scissors dial fighter to protect himself because it creates like a shield as a defensive means, and it protects Umika and Kairi. So then at that point they go join up with the others. They end up fighting Ushibarak, and what happens is that we end up seeing that Kairi uses the good striker to create copies of himself, and then eventually they end up doing a team attack with the 3 copies of Kairi, and then Toma and Umika doing their finishing attacks while Noel does his finishing attack. And we do see the Patoranger X form as well in this episode. So then following this, the Gangler gets destroyed. They never managed to collect the Lupin well, they managed to collect one Lupin collection item. They managed to collect one that's based on the Dingy Brace, which is cool. But they don't manage to collect the other one that's for the Status Gold safe. So there's 2 of them. We don't know why that whole situation is. We know that there's supposed to be 2. But they only got 1. So what does end up happening is that from here, the Gangler is turned big by Gochi. Then following this, Toma and Umika end up using the X trains that Noelle gives them so that they can be summoned, and Noelle summons the gold and silver trains, not the X trains, the thunder and the fire ones. And what happens is that they form X Emperor. In the meantime, the other Lupin Rangers form Lupin Kaiser. So what happens is that we have Lupin Kaiser alongside X Emperor Slash, and we end up seeing this combination of the two mechas fighting against Ushiborak. So that's pretty cool. And eventually it switches from X Emperor Slash to X Emperor Gunner, and that goes over well, and it switches to Patoranger X with that. And then following this, they end up also switching things to where Thunder and Fire join with Lupin X to form, Lupin Kaiser to form Lupin Kaiser trains, so that they have that attachment. And then it switches back to X Emperor, and then they have X Emperor Slash that does the finishing move against Ushiborak. So yes, that whole thing occurs. Then what we do end up seeing is that at the end of the episode, Noelle talks about how he was able to deal with the ganglers, and he had to work with the thieves in order to deal with the ganglers. So that whole thing happened. The Power Rangers weren't so happy about that he was working with them, but at the same time they were glad that they managed to destroy the ganglers, and they also learned of the fact that there are 2 ganglers that got away. So they know that, at least. As far as things go, otherwise, what we do end up hearing is at the end they talk about how they know now that the Versus vehicles can't open up the status gold safes, at least right now. They have to figure out why and what they can do to fix that, and Noelle doesn't know either. They also end up discovering with Umika that Toma now does trust Noelle, so that's an important change. Toma was one of the ones that was pretty stubborn in that situation. So now there is trust with the teams. As far as things go, otherwise, the preview for the next episode looks pretty cool. What we are seeing is that, this episode had Lupin Kaiser with X Emperor. Next episode we'll have Pat Kaiser with X Emperor. Meaning there will probably be a similar idea just with the other team, but it will have a different story. As far as the enemy goes, it's going to be Giwi, Giwi. So one of the other members of the ganglers from this trio. So in other words, there was Ushiborak this week, Giwi next week, and then likely the 25th episode will have Lyman, the leader of the gang, fighting against them. And what that could lead to is either episode 25 or 26 will lead into the combined mode of the teams. Why do I think that? Because supposedly by the end of July we're supposed to be receiving the combined mode of X Emperor, Lupin Kaiser, and what do you call it? Pat Kaiser. So the combined mode of all the versus vehicles from the three on each side, and then Noelle with his 2 forms will be coming. You can already do that if you've gotten the merchandise for Lupin Kaiser, Pat Kaiser, Good Striker, and the X Emperor merchandise that just started showing up online for Japanese stores. And you can already form it. Like, people can already form Good Cool Kaiser, which is the combination of all those together. So that's 11 mechas in one, because there's 4 for X Emperor, and then there's 3 for both teams, and then on top of that there's Good Striker, so that's 11. So keep that in mind. That should be introduced in the show hopefully by episode 25, latest I would say 26, but I'm expecting 25 to be the episode where we'll actually see it. And with this trio situation, it definitely makes plenty of sense that they would be doing it at a midway point. Again, I'm not sure if episode 50 if there will be an episode 50, but if it is that way, it would make sense just because they set up this whole trio. There's supposed to be this major group of villains. Also, what we end up seeing in the preview is that Zamigo is going to return, which is another thing that's going to be cool because we haven't seen Noelle's interaction with Zamigo yet. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that will go about and whether or not he's going to know anything about Zamigo. And it's like we haven't seen Zamigo in a while either. So please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I know this video is a little bit long-ish, not that long actually, but I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.